Welcome to a quick discussion of Atelier Ayesha, The Alchemist of Dusk DX. This year is the 25th anniversary of the Atelier games, so I wanted to highlight my personal favorite game in the series and talk about the series as a whole. The Atelier games are a long-running series of JRPGs that started around 1997. The first game was on the PS1, if I'm not mistaken, and there have been a ton of games since. They typically release in sets, so for example, Atelier Ayesha, which was originally released in 2012 in Japan and I think 2013 internationally, this is the first game in the Dusk trilogy. The version I'm currently playing is actually part of the Atelier Dusk trilogy set, which includes this game, Atelier Eska and Logi, and Atelier Shally. So yeah, basically the different games tend to be relatively standalone within their respective set of games. The one before this was the Ireland trilogy, which was actually my introduction to the Atelier games. But this is my personal favorite, and if you were to ask me which Atelier game I would recommend, I would actually say to start with the Dusk trilogy. I almost feel like it's the best balance between introducing players to the more traditional aspects of the series, while also not being as overwhelming as something like the Ireland trilogy, which is also available on current platforms. The Dusk trilogy and Ireland trilogy and the trilogy after this, the Mysterious trilogy, are all available on PS4, Switch, and PC. This being a game that was technically made by Koei Tecmo. It's basically done by a company called Gust, but then they merged with Koei Tecmo. So the Ireland trilogy was published by NIS, but the later games were published by Koei Tecmo. Either way, this being a Koei Tecmo game on Switch, the results are about as good as you could expect. They're not necessarily the best studio for optimizing Switch games specifically. So areas like some really busy, bizarre areas of town tend to kind of lag a lot. Other areas run relatively okay, but yeah, the busier town areas and field areas tend to be a little choppy. So I would probably recommend either the PC version or the PS4 version, but this being a JRPG series, I almost feel like it's not as big of a deal, at least, because at the very least, it's more of a slow-paced, methodical kind of game, not as it's not like a Ninja Gaiden situation where you want really high response times. You don't really need that for a game of this style. But again, if you want a better frame rate, there's always the PS4 version, and I actually can't speak for the PC version. I don't know if that ended up being good or not. So the Atelier series generally revolves around two specific concepts. One is crafting, the other is time limits. Later games would actually get rid of time limits, but up until the Dusk trilogy, most of the games had time limits. So we play as Ayesha Tugel, who is an alchemist who is trying to find her missing sister Neo. We have 3 years of in-game time to find Neo, so we have to use our time wisely. There is traditional JRPG combat, but I almost feel like the main appeal of the series is its crafting. So you can gather various materials in different areas and then turn them into other items using alchemy. So for example, you can also choose the individual ingredients to get better quality or special effects. And then you can also choose things like overall quantity if you merge multiple items in one go, or if you make multiple items in one go, you'll end up gaining extra, so we're gaining 30% if we actually use up all of our ingredients and just keep crafting instead of crafting in separate batches, if that makes sense. But I think I'll only make one for the sake of demonstration. We can put in the ingredients manually or at random. I actually don't entirely know what this does. I think we actually get a tutorial for that soon, but we'll just go with random for now. Yeah, the crafting system is kind of the main focus of the series. hence the name Atelier, which I'm pretty sure means workshop in French. So yeah, the main gimmick is crafting and being able to like custom tailor various attributes of what you're crafting for different properties for specific circumstances. So yeah, I'm pretty sure we learned about more details about alchemy here, but I'll skip through this for the sake of time. So yeah, we have a synthesis skill now. So yeah, you can get basically different skill properties. So for example, for healing items or like items like weapons, armor, you can get different different properties that can help you out, which can definitely be good, because these games are not actually that easy. These are actually pretty tough, to be honest. But again, I would actually say this is not a bad starting point. I almost feel like most people would say start with the Dusk Trilogy, just because, relatively speaking, it is one of the more lenient ones. Again, I think it's with Shally, or either that or the game after, which is the start of the Mysterious Trilogy, when they started really easing up on time limits. So, the Arlen Trilogy, I started with the first game of that trilogy, Atelier Ayesha, which was not a good starting point because the time limit is actually really strict in that game. I want to say I used a guide to get through that because of how strict the time limit was. Toturi also is pretty strict, and the third game in the Arlen Trilogy, Atelier Meru, I never even finished it because there were several quirks with it that I just did not enjoy, so I just returned it. These games in general were games where I would buy them if I saw them, and there were the types of games where you'd go into like a GameStop and they'd have one copy on the shelf and that was the only copy they had, so you'd have to settle for the opened copy that was just sitting on the shelf, and then you'd have to remove like the price sticker and like the little circle sticker they put to keep the case from opening up, and that was always a big headache. But it's one of those where it's like if you wanted to play the Atelier games, you kind of had to like settle for, yeah, the open copy, just because this is how obscure it was. I want to say the series is actually a lot less obscure now. When the series started, it was definitely pretty unknown, but I almost feel like the more recent games have kind of widened its popularity. So we have a world map system. When you travel, it'll basically give you an arrival date, and like each area has a specific duration of how long it'll take to get there, which again also counts for like the time management systems. So if you actually want to like get the best ending, and these games usually have multiple endings, you have to really carefully plan out everything, which is kind of fun, but also extremely stressful. But yeah, instead of a traditional like overworld, we basically just have like little interconnected areas like this that we can choose from. So, in various field areas, you have two main options. You can either collect items at gathering points. If you hold down A in this case, you can pick up a bunch of items that you can use for alchemy later. And you can also fight enemies. We can press Y in this case to get a first strike. I want to say there's supposed to be a transition between the field and battles, like a fade-in, and I feel like that's missing in this version. Another really weird quirk that I actually can't speak for if it's in this version specifically, or if that was also a thing on the PS3 version, is you cannot use the control stick for menus. You have to use the D-pad. Again, I don't know if that's a thing for this re-release, or if that's just something the original game did as well. So the combat has like a tag mechanic where you have the little bars below the health bars, and you can either perform like a follow-up attack or help guard another character. There's also the whole system on the side where there's also a back attack system, so if you manage to get behind the enemy, you can deal more damage. But also you might notice the bar on the side of the screen where it shows the turn order. So the closest analogy I can come up with is Final Fantasy X, and it kind of works similarly, where specific attacks might move your position like for the next in line. So like specific attacks might mean you don't attack as quickly, or might speed up your actions and things like that. So there is a bit of strategy, but again, I almost feel like the combat isn't really the focus. I almost feel like the exploration and crafting is more of the focus. That being said, the combat is actually very difficult. I remember struggling a lot on one of the final story bosses. To be fair, I don't think I crafted very good equipment too, so that didn't help, obviously. You have various party members as well that can help you out. You know, there's also a skill system and an MP system, so you obviously have like special attacks, like magic. And yeah, you can perform like follow-up attacks to basically deal a little bit more damage. Obviously, the combat isn't overly difficult at this point. This is like still the first year of in-game time. But also you get different points for defeating enemies or collecting everything in an area. So for example, there's the little gathering prompts there. So if we actually find every gathering spot in this area, we'll gain additional points. These points can be spent on different unlocks later on to gain different attributes, like even things like health regen and stuff like that. Sadly, I don't have that, so that's why we went into this fight with not a ton of health or MP, because we don't actually have a really good way to recover MP or recover health without using a specific item that heals us every turn, which I think I have equipped on Ayesha at the moment. But yeah, in general, these games are pretty interesting. I honestly do like the Dusk trilogy a lot, but I still need to play Eschanology and Shally. I do have the collection, so I'll get to those eventually, but because I played this game pretty close to launch on PS3, I figured I'd try to go through Ayesha's story mode again to kind of refresh on what like the overarching like narrative was, and kind of remember things in case there's like story ties to the next game. A lot of the games also have different artists, so a lot of art styles are very polarizing for the series. So for example, the Dusk trilogy was actually done by, I think the artist's name is Hidari, who also worked, I think, on Fire Emblem Echoes Shadows of Valentia. So in general, this was a fairly popular art style. I almost feel like this is one of the tamer art styles for the series. Some of the Atelier games definitely have a lot more fan service. This game is definitely still prone to that occasionally, but it's a lot more dialed back compared to the Arlen trilogy, which honestly I remember having quite a bit of fan service. And from what I've seen, some of the more recent games, like the Ryza games, also rely a lot on fan service. But again, I haven't played those, so I can't speak for sure. Most field areas are actually really tiny. But yeah, you can clear out all the enemies and find all the gathering spots to gain some extra points, and then move on to the next zone, and so on. So yeah, that opens up an interconnecting area over here. So yeah, you basically will unlock new areas. Obviously, different story events will happen at certain areas too. And there are also like side quests, like you can deliver items to specific places. And yeah, so let's actually, also there's like a traveling shop with this character. There's also a notebook to keep track of everything. So for example, like gathering requirements and hunting requirements are tracked. It will log all of like the times you've, or like what day you met certain requirements and things like that. Also keep track of things like side quests. Most of these are crafting based, so you need to get a specific item and then deliver it to the right person in each town. Yeah, in general, these games are pretty straightforward, but the time limit is one of the things that makes them a little bit less accessible. So in a way, I do feel like Ayesha is a really good starting point, because it will ease you into the time limit without completely overwhelming you. From what I gather, Eschanology also has a time limit, but I've heard that one is actually really lenient. So yeah, either of these two games I think are almost best starting points because it will still introduce you to the time limits, but not like, yeah, completely overwhelm you like the Arlen trilogy might. I cannot select this town for some reason. I guess I was still in like the selection mode for some reason. Yeah, the controls are a little bit weird in this version. I don't remember if the PS3 version had these quirks. Again, like they never patched this game at all, unfortunately, for two reasons. One, yeah, having analog controls for menus would actually be really nice. But also, the performance definitely could have used a little bit of extra fine-tuning, to be honest. So yeah, in general, the Atelier games are fun, but they're kind of like, there were so many of them recently, like a new one just came out, and it's kind of confusing to keep track of, like the interconnecting storylines. Like for example, the first series I want to say was Atelier Marie for PS1, which had, I think, 3 games, and then there was like a set of 2 games. I don't remember what those were called. I remember for PS2 there was the Atelier Iris trilogy, and then I think after that was Mana Chemia for PS2, and I think PSP. I may be wrong on that though. And then there was the Arlen trilogy, which again, maybe not the best starting point because of how difficult it is with the time limit. And then the Dusk trilogy, which is Ayesha's trilogy. And then, what else? There's the Mysterious Trilogy, Atelier Sophie. I actually can't remember what all the games were in the Mysterious Trilogy. It was Sophie, there's Liddy and Sewell, and I actually looked it up and it's Fierce was the one I was missing. But Atelier Sophie 2 just came out, so sometimes they generally stick with a trilogy. So, for example, all the Dusk games came out in a row. And then after that, they moved on to the Mysterious Trilogy. But after the Mysterious Trilogy, they made a sequel to the Arlen Trilogy, Atelier Lulua. And then they did the Ryza games, Atelier Ryza 1 and 2, which I've heard are like some of the most successful. I don't think there's a time limit at all in those. But I almost feel like those games have, from what I've gathered, those games actually streamline everything to the point where I almost feel like it would be harder to go back because of how streamlined it is. That's why I almost feel like Ayesha and Escanlogi and Shally for the Dusk trilogy might be a good middle ground between the like two styles. And then yeah, most recently they went back to the Mysterious trilogy with Atelier Sophie 2. So yeah, the actual release order of these games is also kind of tricky to keep track of sometimes. I do recommend these if you're a fan of like turn-based JRPGs and you like games with a lot of crafting systems or like time management. And yeah, a lot of them are pretty solid from what I've played. Again, I still need to get around to the Mysterious trilogy in particular. Those games seem interesting to me, but again, I also need to play the rest of the Dusk trilogy in all fairness. So yeah, I've actually been having fun revisiting this game on my own time to play up to the point for this video, and I'll definitely try to finish this game and work on the rest of the trilogy at some point. But yeah, I do recommend these games. A lot of them are digital only, sadly. Typically the remasters, so the Dusk trilogy and Mysterious trilogy and Arlen trilogy sets are digital only internationally, but newer releases like Sophie 2 and the Ryza games do have physical runs on PS4 and Switch. So yeah, they're widely available now, and I would recommend trying quite a few of them. But on that note, thank you for watching, and I hope you'll join me next time for another discussion.